1,000 people being brutalized and sexually violated in just 3 months in South Africa is a disgrace and deeply disturbing. The majority of people raped are women and those most vulnerable in our society. These statistics show they are often violated by people they know and trust, in the comfort of their own homes or in places where they thought they were safe.
Underlying causes of key child protection failures in South Africa coming under the spotlight tonight. Good evening. I am Thabo Mdluli. Thank you for joining us. 69 more children were murdered between July and September this year compared to the same reporting period last year. South Africa has recorded a 31.7% increase in the murder of children, 14.6% increase in attempted murder cases against children, and a 3.8% increase in assault with grievous bodily harm cases. With these telling numbers, are we doing enough to protect our children? And who is responsible for these high numbers? Joining me now to talk about this is National Coordinator for Missing Children South Africa, Bianca van Aswegen, counselling psychologist Jenna Bayer, attorney at Center for Child Law, Stanley Malematja, head of advocacy for women and men against child abuse, Lamprecht, as well as Edith Kriel, a social worker and executive director at Jelly Beanz. To be a part of the conversation tonight, as I mentioned, send us your WhatsApp questions and comments to 072-110-5584, or otherwise you can tweet us tonight at Newzroom 405. Good evening to you all, and thank you very much for your time and joining us tonight here on In Focus. If we look at the Realization of Children's Rights Index, it indicates that South Africa is, out of 196 countries, 1 being an indicator of best conditions, 196 being the most serious offenses to children, South Africa is sitting at 131. That is not a good place to be sitting at as a country. What are the causes that lead us to sit at that particular number? Jenna?
In terms of causes, there's multiple causes that have led to that situation. As a psychologist, if I could speak from that side, I'm deeply concerned in terms of our schools at the lack of mental health care in schools. Private schools may have, but it's very rare for counselors and psychologists to be in schools. Obviously, in households, you've got substance abuse during lockdown. Of course, it gets exacerbated. And then, of course, there's a lack of nurturance and supporting these children when they go through this. So because of this, there are notable signs and symptoms that occur when they are untreated, whether it's physical symptoms such as antisocial behavior that results as a result of being abused or being burnt or cuts or getting things like welts, apathy, depression, anxiety, bedwetting, nightmares, and things like that. So those are some of the causes. And just children coming from homes that are either neglected or where there's excessive abuse, with little nurturance or care or listening to the emotions of kids or listening to what children go through.
Yeah. Look, 3 out of 5 parents report that they feel their children are not safe in South Africa. That's 6 times the global average that is being reported. What are we doing? I mean, are we doing enough in as far as making progress? Because we know as far as the legal framework is concerned, if you, for example, you look at the indexes, they'll tell you that South Africa scores 77 out of 100 if you look at the legal framework, which means the degree to which we provide legal and regulatory framework and protection. But where are we lacking? What is it that we're not doing?
I think the first thing we need to recognize is that, children's ability to have agency to access their own rights in South Africa, regardless of all this progressive legislation, is almost zero. So they are entirely reliant on some kind of adult duty bearer stepping up and actually taking responsibility and acting as the duty bearers to the rights of children. So it's a systemic failure of adults in our society. We've never really had major issues with the ability to create the correct laws. The enacting of the laws is the real problem. And in answer to your question, are we making progress? I believe absolutely not. I believe on the contrary, lots of children's rights, certainly over the last sort of 600 and whatever it is days, are actually, in my opinion, they're sort of regressing. So in a constitutional democracy where we should actually be seeing children's rights recognized progressively, it's actually going backwards. And I don't want to be too flippant about it, but it's really because we do not take children's rights seriously. There is still very, very high prevailing attitudes where children are not important enough for us to act as duty bearers to ensure their rights are met. And what happens is it's not only that positive duty that we have to discharge to protect children, but there's a negative duty to not harm them. And we're not even getting that right. So there's an increase in harm to children that is actually the easiest of the rights to meet, which is to not hurt them. So there is a flagrant disregard for the rights of children in our society, and I don't believe any piece of paper is going to make that better. It's going to take a massive attitudinal change towards how we see children, their rights, and our duty-bearing obligations to them.
Now, let's just look at that picture and what those numbers are telling us as far as how worse the situation is getting each year. July to September 2020, murder 218, attempted murder 247, assault GBH 1,609. July to September 2021, 287, 283 attempted murder and 1,670. That's a massive, massive increase, or at least a sign that we are not doing the right things. It's not getting any better. Bianca, as Luke mentions that we actually don't have enough as far as children's rights are concerned. If you look at the Out of the Shadows Index, it tells you that when it comes to child-specific rape laws, we score a 0. There's like none that currently exist at the moment. And what does that say?
Yes, definitely. Just in South Africa, if we look at what we deal with as an organization of children going missing and how many children are found that are actually raped, it is beyond shocking that we are dealing with. And as Luke mentioned, it's South Africa's obligation to stand together, and child safety is priority in our country, and it's not what people are doing. Children, with even COVID, had a massive effect on everybody's psychological well-being, even our children. And I don't think enough is being done to look after them in that sense, where we're having a rushed life. Everybody's rushing past each other. Nobody's sitting down and listening to what the children are saying and when they're feeling uncomfortable with something and what they need. And I think that is the most important thing. But it's really, from our organization's side, it's really shocking. And the amount of children going missing in our country for various reasons, children being murdered and raped on a daily basis, it's really out of hand.
Yeah. Stanley?
If I could maybe
yes,
add
Edith,
that
you can come in.
In terms of, statistics are always helpful in terms of giving us an idea. But we know that in reality, statistics are a fraction of what is really happening to our children on the ground. So, as much as we have statistics that's saying, all the words that you've mentioned now, we need to keep in mind that what's happening on the ground to children is actually significantly worse.
Yeah. Stanley, from a law perspective, what is hampering us from enacting the adequate legislation that we have in place? Because we got plenty. If you look at the global average, it's probably pointing at about 69 out of 100 in other countries. We are sitting at 77, which means we've put in place all the possible laws from the UN, from everywhere. We've adopted them, we've put them, including our own constitution, but we are failing to enact them.
Yeah, look, Tabo, I think, it was even noted in the Constitutional Court that no constitutional injunction can and of itself isolate children from the shocks and perils of a harsh family and neighborhood environment. But what the law can do is that the law can create conditions to protect children from abuse and maximize the opportunities for them to lead productive and happy lives. But what we need to acknowledge is that laws don't enforce themselves. There are actually human beings behind who need to enforce the laws. And there's actually something that happened, I think, a week ago that really sent shockwaves insofar as, the rights of children are concerned, insofar as the protection of children are concerned, where a convicted child rapist was elected as a mayor. It goes to show of the lack of seriousness that we are placing when it comes to the interest and the safety of the children. And, we can have all the precious laws, but if we do not have a great enforcement mechanism behind that, then, those laws don't, they don't hold weight. But luckily we have organizations such as the Center for Child Law that actually champion children's rights, and we were actually able to write out a statement, and from that statement it created pressure, and that convicted child rapist was, he was dismissed, as a mayor. So at least we have some working mechanisms, but in all honesty, laws cannot enforce themselves.
All right, we'll go step by step. I suppose we've already spoken of the legal framework, but let's look at the environment, Edith, and let's talk a little bit about whether or not there are enough social protections that we are putting in place and ensuring that safety and stability exists in the country so that those social protections are also protected, ensuring that children are supported. But we'll take a break. When we come back, we'll get into that conversation. 072-110-5584. Who should be held accountable for the key issues that are as a result of failures for the country to protect its children? You can let us in on that and your views tonight. Or if you've got questions for our panel, do send them through. In Focus continues in a moment. Welcome back live tonight with us here on In Focus. Very, very concerning issue, of course, following the rise in crime committed against children, as reported by the Minister of Police. So we are, of course, asking that question. Key failures in the protection of children, who should be held accountable? There are, of course, experts who believe that if the community, the police, as well as the private sector, including civil society, work together, that progress can be made and these numbers can be reduced, and this has been seen in other countries. But particularly if we look at four key areas, one being the environment, of course, the legal framework, the government commitment and support, and of course the infrastructure that is put in place to ensure that kids are protected. So Edith, before the break I was saying, let's look at the environment, that being the safety and stability of the country. I mean, the stability of the country itself, one would say economically, has been a little bit of a challenge, which means more and more we want to close the taps when it comes to social services. And therefore, are we doing enough as far as that is concerned? But also the current social protection that is there, does it go far enough?
Unfortunately, I wish I had better news, but honestly, just say that the reality is that our child protection system is broken in our country. On a daily basis, we sit with children who are desperately needing services to protect them from rape, from abuse, from neglect in their home. I have cases where I literally fight on a daily basis with the organizations that are held responsible for child protection in various different areas. And sadly to say, this is ultimately the responsibility and the mandate of the government to make sure that children are kept safe. And I think that we are failing miserably. And I think the reality is for many children and families, asking for help from the Department of Social Services is often the last thing they want to do because they don't feel that there's anything that is being done to help. From a professional point of view, I sometimes myself feel really helpless. Yeah. To give an example, I'm dealing with a case at the moment of a child where we reported in March regarding emergency procedures that need to be put in place to protect this child. We are now sitting in November and nothing has been done. And this is one of multiple cases. And I'm not referring to when children are just, in a relatively uncomfortable situation. I'm talking about life and death situations. And it really is sad to me to see the lack of interest of social workers, the lack of care and compassion, the poor management and supervision of social workers, and the lack of capacity and skill and also numbers of social workers. And my sense would be that I think that the NGO sector in general tries really hard to provide good services. I think, though, sometimes Department of Social Services falls very short of the kind of services that they should be rendering. If I may just say, obviously not all social workers, everywhere are not doing their duty. We have many who are absolutely amazing. Yeah. But unfortunately, we have too many who are not skilled and not caring.
Right. One of the catalytic issues when we are on that score is the provision or at least compliance from government's point of view of providing alternative residential care facilities, but not only that, keeping the children in those residential care facilities long enough for them to be safe. Who are the role players here? Who should be held responsible? Edith?
So, ultimately we don't want children moved from their homes. We want children to stay in their homes or in their communities, in their extended families. And removal into alternative care really should be the last resort. The reality, though, if we have a look at the alternative care realities, is that we don't have enough services. And so many times children that need emergency removal and placement, there is nowhere to go. So, we are trying to make private arrangements, as an example, in a school where we're asking a school teacher, can you just take this child home for the weekend? Which is utterly unacceptable. That the mandate of the government isn't being followed. Alternative care is the last resort, but I do think we do not have enough people in the community who are able to offer that care. And of course, we don't have enough formal resources who offer the kind of therapeutic environment and caring environment that our children really need.
Yeah. Let's take a call from Johannes joining us on the line on 072-110-5584. Johannes, good evening, and thank you very much for your time. What's your contribution tonight in this conversation?
Good evening. How are you?
Well, thank you very much, Johannes.
Yes, I'm fine. I want to comment about when they're doing for the kidnapping our children and the raping. I think maybe the government must make a stand on that because of even our local government and the national. They know all those things. Their children, they are suffering. When they go to school, they are kidnapping our children. It's better they can bring back the handball to fight all these things. Because what the people, when they do on this, they know there's no handball. If they go to jail, they are going to enjoy the meal and then nice and responsibility by the other side. They come back again, they do all those mess again. So it's better they can bring back the handball. These things are not going to happen again.
Johannes in Tsepiso, I appreciate your call tonight. So let's bring back the death sentence. This will certainly prevent sexual exploitation of children and so on and so forth. Frontline support workers, Jenna, probably one of the key areas, particularly in as far as supporting victims, but also their parents and those who come to report. Are we doing enough to train those who would be in the front to receive these cases, to ensure that they have, I suppose, the psychological training that you have to be able to address the needs of the family, but also the needs of the victims?
No, well, given the statistics you've spoken about, I don't think we're doing enough at all. A, and B, it's very difficult to become a psychologist. So naturally, there's going to be less. So yeah, I just don't think that the right people are equipped. Are the people in place equipped to create non-shaming spaces? Do they, when a child comes in, do they get argumentative, confrontational, or do they support the child? Do they listen to the child? Because often what happens in these situations is children will blame themselves. They'll think, I caused it. So if you have a hostile person, then that's what's going to happen. The child will then blame themselves or self-blame and think they did something wrong.
Yeah.
Are these places offering places of safety and support? I'm not so sure. I don't think so. And so what ends up happening is children would rather not go forward or rather just keep it to themselves or end up hiding their feelings. So are we doing enough? On the evidence, no. And on the evidence, you can also see it by the antisocial behavior by young children who've been abused, who then take out their frustrations on others, because you can see that too. So a lot more psychological training needed, a lot more promotion of mental health, a lot more eradication of mental health stigma, and most importantly, the eradication of the shame culture.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, children don't come forward because they feel ashamed, or they think it's me, I caused this, what's wrong with me? So creating an environment where children will happily come forward and that they can trust authorities as well.
Now, from a psychology point of view, I mean, having listened to that call from Johannes, who says, let's bring back the hang power, one of the areas that still requires support and attention, for example, is the area around corporal punishment and violence in schools, as well as in covered areas within the confines of the home. I mean, we are not being able to deal with the fact that children are still receiving corporal punishment at home. What would a return of a death sentence, for example, do to this whole psychology of violence, where we say generally South Africa struggles with this question of violence because we're a violent society?
You're asking me, Tabo?
Yes.
Yeah, it's half the battle. We have a history of solving things through violence. We solve conflict in that manner. Number two, we're a very unequal society. Okay, so would the death penalty prevent, the perils that an unequal society brings, which is conflict in the home, not having support services, not having healthcare services to deal with trauma? So the death penalty for me is half the battle, because you've still got to have restorative services, you've still got to have healthcare services to deal with trauma. You still have to, even if you punish people, there's still got to be some kind of restorative process. So it may help. I'm not convinced, because even if you put the death penalty in place, there's not enough healthcare services and restorative services in place to fix things or to make things better, or to help people who've been abused, or even the perpetrator to help them too. So there's not enough restorative things, and to just have the death penalty. So at best, it's half the battle. That's what I believe.
Look, come in here and give me your views. I mean, as far as the systemic focused advocacy, right, that promotes, for example, the testing of effective models of prevention and early intervention, particularly when it comes to exploitation and sexual abuse of children.
Look, I mean, my opinion on the death penalty is it will have the inverse effect. And the simple reason for that is, the disincentives to disclose abuse for young people in our country are many. I mean, the adults are disincentives. We don't listen to children. We don't believe children. We don't pay attention to children. We say to children, please, Lord, don't report abuse. They're going to rip you apart on the witness box. The defense attorneys are going to shred you. So, I mean, there are so many disincentives to children disclosing abuse that if you actually succeed in getting justice, they're going to kill the person that abused you, who's often a person that you care about, who you don't want to die, you just want justice or you want the abuse to stop, I think would have an absolutely devastating effect on disclosures. And in addition, I think we'll see our murder rate increase dramatically because they will kill the witnesses, because then there's no reason to leave the witness alive, because if the witness testifies against you, you're going to die as the accused. So I don't think it will have any positive effect whatsoever.
Yeah.
In terms of the advocacy strategies and the prevention models, I think that what we need to be careful of, and it's just a cautionary tale, much like Edith was saying, is that obviously primary prevention is key, but primary prevention is an entire systemic input, right from people having decent jobs, dignified jobs, the ability to access water, electricity, good places to live. There is so much that contributes to childhood adversity that we would need to almost look at the basics of every right children are afforded in our country. It shouldn't be progressive. It shouldn't be incremental. They're indelible rights, but they don't have most of these rights met. So we need to be careful that we don't romanticize the idea of prevention, whether it's primary, that abuse doesn't occur, or that secondary prevention risk assessment, early intervention model, where we forego good services, statutory services, intervention services, on this sort of almost romanticized notion that the communities will take care of it, and the idea that, we need to put early intervention programs in place because those are going to solve the problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
The thing is that obviously we want to do that, but we can't, which has happened, unfortunately, is there's been all of this move towards prevention and early intervention. And what has happened is it's decimated the formal protection system. And that formal protection system is a system that provides legal assistance to children whose lives are in danger. And what happens is, because there is no system to hold them, we say, oh, well, we've got prevention and early intervention programs. The statutory programs almost fall by the wayside due to some romanticized notion of prevention and early intervention in a system that doesn't have resources. So we live in a limited resource society where it's a bit romantic to have these prevention and early intervention models without it being adequately resourced. So I think all of it needs to happen, and it's not an either-or conversation, but a both-and.
Quick one, Stanley, from your side. providing legislation clarity on the prevention of child labor, for example, one area that has still not been properly explored. What are the bottlenecks?
Look, as I think my colleague Luke just mentioned earlier, that we are in a very unequal society, right? Still hanging in poverty, and and also the social issues that we are living amongst. Some of them push children to try and go into the labor market so that they can try and fend for themselves. And because of the type of society that we are, where adults are taking advantage of children, that's where we also, find issues of, child labor. And I know, Tabo, you mentioned a very important point earlier about, corporal punishment still going on. You'd remember, I think some years ago, the Center for Child Law took a case to the Constitutional Court to have the reasonable chastisement declared unconstitutional. And, when the court found in our favor, you would have seen the outrage, and it shows that, we still have a society that believes that the only way to talk or to discipline a child is through inflicting corpus pain. So people were outrageous and say, no, the court can't tell me how to raise my child. If the court says I can't touch this child, then this court must come and take the child and live with the child. So we still have that society that believes in sorting things out through violence. And that is also, it is a level of bullying from adults, because, the notion is that you only, in most cases, you attack someone physically or you inflict corpus pain because you know that person can't retaliate back. And that is the situation where children find themselves in. They find themselves under abuse because they can't retaliate to those adults.
Stanley, unfortunately, there are lots of issues still to raise. Time always the enemy. Look, Edith, Bianca, Stanley, and Jenna, appreciate your time, and thank you very much for joining us tonight here on In Focus.